Hi, and welcome to the Common Sensei number 5. And the theme for today is, for work-life balance, look to the labor unions. Now that may sound like a rather strange title, and I will explain what I mean. And what it really goes around is that the problem we all face, and we do all face a problem, with work-life balance is systemic. Yet, what I notice is that everybody is trying to solve it on a personal level. But what if the way out is not more tech or more coaching, but a return to good old labor union power? It may sound crazy, but not as crazy as how busy we are. It would be hard to count the number of times that a client of mine has joined a session, either late or having hopped directly over from another meeting, I'm talking online, and said, "Things are just crazy," or "I've been insanely busy." Those words, crazy and insane, are used freely and without much reflection. I wonder, are they really colloquialisms? Or do those people unconsciously mean what they say? In other parts of the conversation, the theme of work-life balance will inevitably emerge. Even when the subject is leadership or communication skills, the questions turn to this topic. Some of my clients show me their diaries. They're not only back-to-back, but there are also numerous overlaps, sometimes 3 deep, in the appointments. And here's my verdict. It is insane. Things are literally crazy. During performance-related workshops, the question comes up about expectations. What to do about bosses and colleagues who send out emails late at night expecting an immediate answer, or latest by the next morning. And what to do about the need to prove that you're on top of things by meeting that expectation. I call it the cult of busyness, or wearing busyness as a badge of honor. I noticed recently a Harvard Business Review article that shared a similar or the same phrase. So what are we to do about that, is the question. What I notice, as I've mentioned, is that everybody is looking for an individual answer, a personal solution, as though it's their problem to resolve. I always ask myself, can nobody see the naked emperor? Because it's all very well doing all you can to manage yourself, and that's necessary. But what if the system doesn't leave you alone? I try to steer people towards the idea that it's also a systemic problem and needs not only a personal solution, because there's always benefit in that, there's always something we can do that we need to do, that we can improve our performance on, but that it's also a systemic solution. But mostly with that second part, I get met with blank stares. And so I hope by doing this video and showing some graphs, it will land with more impact. The short answer I would offer is that the epidemic of busyness and the shortage, the dearth of work-life balance is driven systemically by what I call the primacy of shareholder value. In other words, placing profit over people. Despite all the talk of the triple bottom line, which is profit, people, and planet, it seldom happens in practice, I notice. The systemic solution is to make people matter at least as much as profit. To achieve that, we need our leaders, those high priests of profit, to do more than just pay lip service to the triple bottom line. And to get there, we ourselves need to stop worshipping at the altar of efficiency for the sake of shareholders. We need to start walking and working among the time poor. As much as I dislike that term, I shall use it here for its poetic ease. And here's why I say this. The image coming up is taken from a free online course available on YouTube and via Substack called Wealth and Poverty. It's offered by retired Professor Robert Reich, who is a prolific author, columnist, and activist, and who was also the US Secretary of Labor during the Clinton administration. He's a fiery liberal, and I'm okay with that, but in case you're not, don't turn away. No matter your politics, it's hard to deny the acuity and relevance of this graph with regards to our topic. And the point is that ever since 1980, productivity levels, in other words, the amount of work you're required to get done in 1 hour, have risen way more than compensation levels. In other words, how much you're getting paid for that hour. The numbers, to be precise, are 64.6% versus 17.3%. In other words, in any 1 hour, you're expected to output an additional 2/3 beyond what you would have been required to produce in 1980, yet you're getting paid only a tiny fraction more than what you got back then. And that gap is growing. Have you ever watched the series Mad Men? It shows how back in the 60s, most middle-class people, with some exceptions, worked fairly regular hours, went mostly uninterrupted in their evenings and weekends, and could afford 3 or even 5 children with hardly a second thought. These days, and it's not only due to invasive tech, we barely have a minute to ourselves, and most people struggle to afford 1 child. In another lesson, Professor Reich points to what he believes caused this shift: the rise of corporate raiders, known today as private equity managers, a phenomenon that began in 1979 and which led to the shift away from stakeholder capitalism, where people mattered as much as profit, to shareholder capitalism, where people mattered only for the sake of profit. He explains it very well in a Substack post, the link to which you can find in the credits below. Beyond that, the glories of capitalism were given further impetus by the unprecedented material success enjoyed by the Western world throughout the 80s. We saw the rise of yuppiedom and the celebration of greed, both of which were superbly reflected in Bret Easton Ellis's novel American Psycho and the movie Wall Street. Much of this was attributed to the trickle-down economic policies of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, although those were really the ideas of the economist Milton Friedman. And that era also saw the wholesale privatization of public enterprises, things like telephone companies, postal services, airlines, and so on. Basically, organizations that existed to serve people became organizations that existed to serve shareholders. In parallel to this was the systematic destruction and waning public perception of labor unions, also known in some countries as trade unions. Margaret Thatcher's victory over the striking coal miners in Great Britain serves as the most evident example of the systematic destruction of the unions. Unions were also increasingly associated with and accused of being, if not socialist, then certainly anti-capitalist. In South Africa, the unions were literally partnered with and led by members of the South African Communist Party, which fed extra fuel to their capitalist enemies' fire. And then unfettered capitalism received its ultimate debate-ending PR boost with the fall of the Soviet Union and the Berlin Wall. And from that moment on, we stopped questioning our servitude to the shareholders. Our conversion to the worship of efficiency for the sake of profits was complete. We came to see the profit motive as the panacea for all social ills. Problems with your country's infrastructure? Just turn it over to the capitalists and they'll make it work. Social media? New technologies? Why? The capitalists know the answer. Don't impose any restrictions. The profit motive will guide them to do what's best. They are, after all, our prophets of profit. I'm being sarcastic, of course. The Guardian technology writer and academic and author John Naughton seems to have noticed this too. In a post some time ago, he said, "When the history of our time comes to be written, one thing that will amaze historians is how an entire civilization managed to impale itself on its worship of optimization and efficiency." My phrase for this phenomenon is the primacy of shareholder value. And it's such an unquestioned belief that when I throw it up in the air as being the cause of the work-life balance issue, I get blank stares in return. The emperor is not only naked, he's invisible. Of course, it's true that there's a lot to be said for the profit motive, for capitalism. But the question that's not being asked is, at what cost? Well, and logic proves this, at the cost of everyone who's not a shareholder, or everything that's not a shareholder, that being you, the employee, the worker, and the planet out there. But hang on, there's one thing we're not seeing here. We assume that those shareholders are someone else, someone out there, the rich. Well, that's true only to a degree, because much of the shareholdings are held by pension funds, which is workers' money, which means we're doing it to ourselves, which really is the height of insanity. It also means that we could stop it if we wanted to. It means that the problem, as Professor Reich points out, is not some evil rich person out there doing it to us, or people out there doing it to us. The problem is systemic. It's the way we've allowed the system to be set up. So, what can we do about it? Well, hire a performance coach. That's me. Ha ha. That's what I should be saying, selling you some program. Instead, I'm pointing to something else. In the workshops, When faced with the question of what do we do about late-night demands from our bosses, I suggest lobbying, by which I mean lobbying within the organization for a shift in culture, demanding that the leadership actually lives the values that are on the wall, values which often include something about the importance of people. However, that only draws those blank stares, because nobody wants to risk it. I also know that it won't be enough. I know that to shift this systemic bias towards creating shareholder value at the expense of everything else will require something bigger: disruption. And I'm not talking about the trendy form of the word that points to digital disruptors, nor the once-off climate and anti-war protests that we've seen during the last 2 decades. As Professor Reich says, those who hold the power that the system has afforded them, our shareholders, are not going to give it up voluntarily. The implication is that it will have to be wrested from them. That will require a disruption on the scale of the British Chartists, the suffragettes, the American Civil Rights Movement, the anti-apartheid movement. History has shown that a disruption on that scale requires serious organization and sustained effort over decades. It also requires withholding the most powerful negotiating tool that people have at their disposal, their labor. Yes, the very labor that is being given at an ever lower price, at the expense of work-life balance. Hence the header of this article. Hence why this points back to the labor unions. In a recent Guardian article, Astra Taylor and Leah Hunt Hendricks, activists and authors of the recently released and highly rated book Solidarity, the Past, Present and Future of a World-Changing Idea, explain. They say labor unions are critically important. They organize people to come together in the real world and to engage in a series of collective actions that ultimately can't be ignored. At their best, unions facilitate collective discipline and long-haul dedication, enabling people to use a clear form of leverage, the withholding of labor. The reason why this is necessary, they say, is that the kind of solidarity required to secure a more inclusive future will not appear spontaneously. It needs to be organized into being. In other words, just a single protest on its own will not be enough. They say, finally, when we come together in an organized fashion, forging new self-conceptions, embracing radical visions, and acting strategically, we can wield the power of numbers to disrupt business as usual, wrest concessions, and pave the way for future victories. So, what would it take for you to get organized, to start lobbying, even protesting? And where would you start? Your boss? Your human resources or human capital department? Your pension fund? It's going to take time for this message to get through. So, for your children's sake, best you start now. Thank you. And if you found value from this, please remember to subscribe. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one.